Right. My name is Louise, and I will be your MC this evening. And how many of you are here for the very first time? I know Ella, right? May I? And hi, Emily, Louise. Okay, lovely, welcome. And the rest of you are familiar faces, and I see you a lot. And are you new? Or you've been here before? What's your name? You mind saying it? Tina. Hi, Tina. Welcome. And of course, welcome to our guest this evening who's going to talk to you very, very shortly. And I must welcome our Zoom audience. Hi, Zoom people. Those of you who can get here as the weather gets nicer, we would love to fill all of these pews with people who love us and come regularly. And I know you're there. I can see you even though I can't. So, we're going to talk about time. Brother Tony is going to launch a brand new month for us this evening. And the theme of the month is the cycle of life. And the topic is circle of consciousness. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I never know what Tony has up his sleeve until I talked to him this afternoon. And I got a very good idea of the intriguing, and what we're going to have exploring what time is. So I don't know about you, but if I ask you to define time, is it a fixed thing? No? It changes? So if I look at the clock in a minute, it's going to change. It's not going to be 7:02. What do you mean? You want to offer? You want to speak? Wait. Let's let the Zoom people know they didn't come. Let's let them hear you.
Time, time keeps moving. So it's always making some or the other change lives everywhere in the world.
So it's not static. It moves like electricity. It moves. Anyone else have a kind of definition of this weird thing called time that Tony is going to speak for an hour on? Okay. So I know we judge it according to our own experiences too, right? Either I'm early or I'm late or I'm on a thing called time, right? People are late, people are early or on time. Then we have medieval times and ancient times and modern times. So we keep it moving. We keep redefining time. So we have an active role. And I'm going to steal what I knew for years, Tony. I know it's one of the lines you said on the phone this afternoon. Tony, you there? Oh, he's been. Um, if you took a rocket ship and you could travel as fast as the speed of light, all the way up and come down, who would be here on Earth? No one you knew. If you can travel the speed of light, you're no longer in our what we call time. So just to pique your interest, and Tony's going to open up the whole conversation now. And I will tell you that Tony is an architectural international planner. He's based in the city, has his firm in the city, and he has come to us many, many times here. He's also a student of the Brahma Kumaris. How many years? 23 years. And without further ado, I would like to give you the rest of the hour. Brother Tony. 23. Well, I look at the age of my children and I say, you know what? I agree with you. Time flies. Is that what you're saying? No, but time flies. You got that one, right? Okay. Have a good evening. Thank you, Brother Tony, for coming this evening to us.
Actually, Reese opened up with what I was going to ask as an opening statement. How do you perceive time? Because a cycle cannot exist if we can't measure it, right? Otherwise, not a cycle. So, how do you perceive time? Is a very important characteristic of you're looking at trying to understand the cycles that I consider the cycles of your awareness and consciousness. There's a statement I got from the internet, which is a classic statement about time that says it's a continuous progression of existence, keyword existence, that occurs in an apparently irreversible succession from the past to the present and into the future. It's a lot of words to basically say it's always going. What you said before, time's continuous, always continuous. And when I was putting together my thoughts on this, I thought about an analogy that I've used before in mathematics and geometry, which is the analogy of a point. So, and timeline, to use an expression, right? Timeline, if you think about it, in geometry, when you have a line, it's essentially a point that moves. The minute that point moves, you create a line. And by mathematical definition, a line is infinite. The only thing that we do in geometry is we take pieces of it. It's a segment. But a line, by definition, is infinite. And it's a point moving in a particular direction. So that was the analogy that I took. And I like that analogy because I'm going to come back to it later on. And so that movement of the point becomes a point, a line, plane, three-dimensional. All of these things move. In other words, for any of these things to happen, they have to move. Line, point has to move for it to become a line. Line has to move to become a plane. Plane has to move to become a solid. And then you have the dimension of time, which is what measures our existence. So that to me is the kind of philosophic, conceptual definition of time if we look at it from the outside. That's what time is. It's something that you look at and it's defined in very, very clean conceptual terms. In mathematics, I like this aspect of mathematics where there's clarity, there's no equivocation, there's no subject for debate. Line is a line. And if you want to use that, it's a line. Otherwise, it's not a line. It's not what it can only be one thing. However, we don't look at time as a concept. Only in an occasion like this, where we ask the question. We look at it more as an experience. And Louisa's example that she quoted is very important because we perceive time experientially. When we look at time from the outside, we have calendars, we have schedules and what have you. These are all kinds of things that we use to manage our affairs, but we experience time internally ourselves. Our experience of time is not linear. Actually, nothing in our life is linear, but that's, so when you get to the perception of time as an experience, then it becomes a lot more complex, not clean and defined philosophically. However, it turns out that the scientists have actually figured out that time is actually subjective. Because the example that Louise showed is that if you get into a spaceship and travel X number of years at not even the speed of light, just travel very fast, much faster than we travel here. We come back in the same speed. When you come back, you will have aged, I don't know, maybe 2 years, 3 years, and everybody else around you will have aged, depending on how fast you were going, a lot more. So it's now proven scientifically, because this happens with astronauts going into space, that you age differently depending on the perspective you have. So if you're traveling in space, you're actually aging differently. You have a different time experience, a perception. So your point, your point of experiencing it has an incredible impact on time. Now, we all think we're prisoners of time. That it's a rigid, structured environment where we have no say in it. It's a day, it's a week, whatever. Here we go. Science already shown that we're not prisoners of time, that we actually have the ability to define it in different ways. So how do we experience time? Everything that has been discovered in science the last 200, actually more maybe the last 5,000 years, indicates that time, that our experience of time has to do that everything in the physical universe is defined by a pulse, by a rhythm, by a cycle. Nothing is linear. Nothing at all in the entire existence of the universe. As far back as our telescopes and our spaceships telescopes, nothing is linear. Everything is cyclical, rhythmic, pulse, terms that we all are very familiar with. No,
It's static.
it's all moving. It's always, but it's a question of how do you perceive it? We know we don't stand still because we are experiencing something. So you have tides, you have the pulsings of the liquids that create life in our universe. You have the movement of the earth and the stars in the universe, and you have subatomic particles, all of which have a pulse. They don't exist without a pulse. The minute an atom stops having any kind of movement inside, stops being an atom. Can no longer be what it is. It's not a structure of the universe. So this is where we experience time as a cycle. And the thing that I was looking at is how do these cycles manifest themselves in our life? And I came up with a series of them that I think kind of define who we are and how we exist in this world. And the first cycle is what I would call the physical cycle. We are born, we're nurtured, adulthood, we live, and then we die. That's the most fundamental cycle. Everything that's born, that's new, eventually it decays and deteriorates. That's a concept called entropy. That is a fundamental concept of physics in the material universe. So, and the peak for us, ironically, we're living longer and longer. The peak for us is at the age of between 16 and 23, something in that neighborhood. That's where we peak physically. That's where all of the records, sports records, have been set. Is in that age. You look at the history of the records and you put them on a graph, you'll see that all the records are in that age group. One exception is women's gymnastics. For some reason, women as young as 12 or 13 years old have become world champions, and it's still very much prevalent. And another exception on the other side is boxing, where boxers going to 28, 29, they're still going to their peak. But that is the cycle, the physical cycle. Fortunately, it's not the only part of our existence, but it's an important part. So that's the first concentric cycle. Then the second one, I call the cycle of your intellect, cycle of your perception, of yourself, of the world. In that cycle, we born curious. We invent language at 2 years of age. It's pretty important. And we keep developing. And that cycle seems to peak, from what I can see, between the ages of 25 to about 40, that range, 42, something like that. Now, I say that because I recently was kind of stunned to find out that I don't know if anybody is familiar with Isaac Newton, who's who actually created the laws of physics that we know. As an architect, it's how formulas for algebra and for other kinds of things are defined. It's through the laws of Newton's laws of physics. Like an object that is stationary does not move until something makes it move. An option that is moving doesn't stop until something makes it stop. There's a bunch of laws that come from that, most of which you'll be familiar with. So he was 26 years old when he came up with all of these things. At the time he was 26. He was extraordinary person. And then there was people like Einstein that did it someone later on. But the intellectual cycle, again, the peak period, like when someone gets a Nobel Prize, they're 60 years old, 70 years old, but it's for stuff they did when they were 30 or 40 years old. That's when it came out. So there's a peak to that cycle too. And then our physical cycle is then enveloped by the intellectual cycle. And they get connected by something called emotions. And that becomes a complicating factor. Those cycles, physical cycle and the emotional, the intellectual cycle becomes tied up in this whole process called emotions. So we think about, for me, kind of the example I'm thinking about is my daughter, who's going now for a graduate degree after working for a while. I talked to her recently, and so she's involved and she's going to get an MBA and she's working on this and she's doing well in some of these areas. And then the discussion talks about, well, what I should have done before. Why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I work on this before? I waste this. And I'm saying, what are you talking about? That's all past. You can't invest energy on what you didn't do, what you should have done. I mean, that's and then she'll be up. But now that I'm leaving this position, I have to get a new job in a different industry. Or so to me, that is a perfect example of how we take these concentric issues of physical and mental acuity and tie them up into parcels that sometimes become nuts. So the only thing you're doing now is you're doing this degree. That's all that's important. What happened before is gone, and what's happening in the future, you don't know anything about. But she was definitely, carrying on about this stuff. So that's one of the issues that of these circles that define us. Where do they take us? I have this very cliche that I use about there being two kinds of people in the world. Those that focus on what they want, and those that focus on what they don't want. Now, we all a mixture of that. But nobody here would have a hard time figuring out who's the most successful one of those two kinds of people. Okay? I don't have to explain that. Because the people that focus on what they want generally get it. And the people that spend a lot of time on what they don't want, then they'll have the same kind of experience. Yeah.
You're making me realize how much time I spend in my mind, and it's really a question for all of you, thinking about the past. what percentage, you don't have to raise your hand, what percentage of time does the average person spend thinking about things that are done? Sometimes we call that worry, but it's definitely, here we call it waste thoughts. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of waste, isn't it?
In that brief conversation with my daughter, 60% of the conversation was about the past, future. I got to know a little about her MBA courses, what she's doing. I had to kind of really push for that. She was telling about, I mean, we spend a lot of time and unfortunately, we get focused on what do we think, how do we appear to other people? How do people respond to us? What do we think of our accomplishments and how do people perceive us? And all of these things, that becomes a definition of what we are. Whereas people that are moving forward, they don't have these things of no consequence to them. It's not important to them. They keep moving. You talk to them about the past, it's like, what past, and I have nothing to deal with that. Kind of analogy. People that used to smoke, right? And I've known several people that were heavy smokers, and they stopped smoking. And there's two people. One that hasn't smoked in 30 years and still thinks about smoking. Still thinks about. I remember a guy I worked with, very extraordinary guy, but he says when he has coffee, when he's having a meal, he still thinks about smoking a cigarette. And then there's another person who was a smoker. And when you talk to them about smoking, they said, I can't believe in my mind that I ever did that. I don't know who that person was that smoked, because in my mind right now, it's not something that I only know it as a fact, but emotionally, I can't believe that was something I did. So it's two different perspectives of it. That person who doesn't believe that they ever did that, that's a person that's moved on. Whereas this other person, and this was a very competent guy, still thought about smoking. It's a very important kind of distinction, right? Where you spend your energy. Where do you spend your energy? Where do you put your energy?
Talked about future thinking. And I'm thinking, well, future thinking can be planning, making plans, but future thinking can also be worry, can it?
Now, that future thinking, your future planning is very good. Future worrying is not good. Okay, my daughter was future worrying, not future planning. That I would have found constructive.
Yeah, it can cripple, really.
Future worrying was very. I mean, it's kind of a disturbing thing to be doing, because it's like the cliche is that worrying about something that hasn't happened is like paying a mortgage on a loan you haven't taken. So that I thought is a very appropriate analogy.
So when people talk about staying in the now, I don't know if you want to talk about this now, but being in the moment, that's such an important phrase today. Where does that stand in relation to what you're talking
But
about?
that's exactly the point I was trying to make with my daughter. This is the only time you have. This is the only moment that you're experiencing. This is the energy you have is for this program that you're in. That's where you live. And I think the problem is if you have the past and the future bracketing you all the time, then you can miss the present, right? Whereas if you're in the present, past and the future have no consequence, except maybe to plan, but that's rarely what you hear. So defines you, defines these things define you, these cycles of awareness, physical, and then your mental acuity. And then there is what I would consider a third cycle. And this is a cycle not of awareness, but of consciousness. And it differs from the other cycles because it does not have decay in it. There are parts of your consciousness, which we'll go into now, that don't decay. they can go on forever in your life. Huh? No entropy, yeah, no decay. I'm not using entropy. You told me that was, we have to be careful about. Okay, all right. And inherent in us as human beings, one of the great qualities that we have as human beings is our urge to look for good in other people, to look for other people, to look for goodness, to look for empathy, to look for altruism, all of these qualities. We do it spontaneously and intuitively. And when we find someone like that, it's a really great experience because my feeling is that it reflects those qualities in yourself. So when you find someone that has these kind of qualities, transcendent qualities, when you find someone that is basically good, a sympathetic, non-judgmental, it's not just that that's a good thing, it's that it reflects qualities in yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't be reacting to it positively. You wouldn't be saying, "Oh, this is a really great person." And this is important because it's no longer, well, this person is very tall or very good looking or very strong or very accomplished or very, articulate. It's a very different experience. This consciousness, no longer awareness, it's consciousness. That I think is one of the is what I'm referring to as the third cycle. This is a inherent quality, fortunately for human beings. Otherwise, we probably would have killed each other already by now. We wouldn't have lasted until this point. And this quality, they have attached all kinds of names. It's been called philosophy since classical times. More recently, it's been called metaphysics. Now, metaphysics is a term that basically is everything associated with spirituality, but without God. So metaphysics is everything you've discussed, had heard discussed here, or anywhere else about spirituality, about transcendent values, but without God. It's a very simplistic, but I think is appropriate. So you have entire realms of organizations, including there's famous American mystic. His name was Edgar Cayce, at the turn of the century. Very famous, documented. He could cure diseases for which there's still no cures here, and it's legitimate. He was drawn into the metaphysical organizations that existed at that time. He himself was a born again Christian, so the metaphysics part of it was not his. But metaphysics, anything, all of this stuff, but you have to take God out of it. What's that seems to be the requirement for a lot of these types of movements that try to understand transcendent human behavior.
He did it in trance.
Huh?
He did it in trance.
Yeah, he did it in trance.
And I visited the Association for Research and Enlightenment. It's in Virginia Beach.
He cured diseases.
Yeah.
He cured one person, one girl who had an infection, bacterial infection in her spine that had affected her ability to talk. And he figured it out and had a treatment that was so complicated. It took 3 or 4 months just to get the ingredients, and then another year to do it. She talked. So that's metaphysics. Okay, when you take supreme being, God, Father, whatever you call it, out of the equation. However, all of this is to avoid saying what it has been for millennia, which is called spirituality. All of this rigmarole is to avoid saying spirituality. It seems to be something that they've had a lot of problems with in modern societies. And this is when you become aware not of what you are, when you start trying to understand who you are. What is the qualities that you have, like the qualities you see in other people? And I think that is the last cycle that I'm referring to. That's a cycle of awareness, and it doesn't deteriorate. It can keep steady or can go up. It gives you an incredible capacity to constantly renew yourself, to understand yourself, to reveal the secrets of your own existence. In my experience here, in the Brahma Kumaris, I've been here now 23, 24 years. And it's like after all this time, there's still things that I find saying, how could I have not known that? How did I not understand that about myself or about another person? It's one of the most extraordinary qualities of this kind of spiritual consciousness is that you're constantly able to discover yourself. Something you can't do if the cycle is going down. Your physical cycle is going down, or if your mental cycle is plateauing. This doesn't go down. It continues with you indefinitely. As long as you're putting effort. You stop putting effort, put no energy, then you stop. Like anything else. Whatever you're doing, if you don't make any effort, then you can't function. So so it's one of the ones that doesn't have decay, doesn't have entropy. So to me, this is what finally makes us complete or whole, helps us understand what it is that we are. I mean, on the train here, I was listening to some people very, very intensely talking about their job. And I've had these experiences various occasions. For some reason, the railroad, the commuter trains, people really get into these really deep discussions. I don't see that in subways, but and these guys were talking about the job and this person, and it was interesting discussion. I was kind of fascinated by it. But I was aware as I'm coming here saying, these people are looking at a very closed cycle of values. Not a bad thing, but if they just pulled away from that, a lot of the static that they're complaining about would disappear. So that's just observations. And I was deeply engrossed by these people. That this person is actually very smart, but he can't do this. And they were, they looked like they probably were very effective people in whatever they were doing. But their engagement, they had finished their work. They were coming home. They were reliving their job today. They were redoing their job today. And this one is doing that. Now here they are, two people, intelligent, sensitive. Why are they talking about the day? Why is that so important? That's because they have nothing else to talk about, because they haven't looked at anything beyond that. That day already happened. I mean, there was nothing there that really was particularly critical and was an interesting assessment of the day. So that to me was an indication, it was a kind of a good example of where we are, okay? Those people are in one place. They're in a cycle. Their emotional, intellectual, physical cycle. They were relatively young people, so that's where they were at. But in listening to them, why am I talking about this guy who has all kinds of idiosyncrasies? What is the purpose of it? Where is it going? We're reliving it because that's their life, their existence defined by that. Whereas when you become spiritually conscious, it's no longer defined by that. It's no longer defined by any of those things. And then you step back and you say, wait a minute, Why am I doing this?
If you've been coming here a while, you know we talk about body consciousness and soul consciousness. So the answer to Tony's question for me is you don't know what's going on. What's their agenda? Are they bragging about something they did that day? Are they subtly talking about how successful they are? Right? There's always ulterior motives when we're into our roles. So, Tony, I think what you're talking about is not the roles we play, right? You're talking about something that has no entropy.
Yeah.
Can I use the word truth?
Well, yes. So yes, what we're doing in this process is we're trying to, if we're engaged in this, looking at the cycles the circles that define our existence, is looking to see where we can find something that we can hold on to that's not relative. So when you're into spiritual consciousness, then you're into knowledge, not just understanding. You're into knowledge. And in spiritual terms, we call that truth. And that's where you're going. It's not like saying there's some ultimate truth in some Ark of the Covenant where someone's going to go in and take this out and some light's going to come out. But something more mundane, but in many ways more significant, because you're looking to define what is it that is immutable about yourself. What is it that makes your life, defines it in a way that's not based on all these experiences, the past, and all your expectations of the future.
So do we learn it or is it innate?
I think we have to basically, it's like an onion, you have to peel the layers off. You have to peel layers off. I mean, knowledge or our intellectual acuity is something that we're all born with. In a previous presentation, I very strongly make the point that we're all born geniuses, everybody, because at the age of 2 years, you literally invent language. Okay? Every one of you invented a language at the age of 2 years. If you didn't learn it from your parents, if you were living in a remote area, you would have invented it. If you're twins living separately from the rest of the groups that you're with, you invent a language, a real language, not gibberish. So we're all born geniuses. And what we do is we create this layer of physical and intellectual and emotional that begins to bury that genius. So to use the term truth is to basically unwrap the layers that you put on it and go back to the essential nature, which is your understanding, your knowledge, and ultimately is your truth. But truth is not in your discussions, your accomplishments, your discussions of somebody else's perception of you. That's not where you're going to find truth. So it's difficult because people confuse truth and fact. They're two different things.
Most of us know right from wrong. Were we taught it or is it something within us? You know, the soul, our basic nature, knows right from wrong. How do I know that? I live with someone who is suffering terribly because of the world. He's really so down and out. And I said to him the other day, I said, you know, you look up at the sky and you see but it upsets you. Why are you looking up at the sky? You know, what is it that motivates you to wonder what they're doing up there? And how is it going to harm us if it is? And I paused and I waited for an answer. And he just, with the saddest voice, he said, because it's not right. So his sense of right and wrong is very pure, and he suffers because of it. Here we learn we have this sense of right and wrong, but we can detach from worldly things in a way where we don't necessarily have to suffer, and we can live in the moment and enjoy it. And that's what we try to do here. But my point is, unless you're, what's the term, psychotic, or you really amoral, you don't know right from wrong. You kind of know, you know, yet it's not just what your parents teach you. Would you agree with that, Tony? You're born with a sense.
Yeah, basically, this goes back to the point I was making earlier. Right and wrong comes from the fact that when you're with someone that is that is transcendent in their values, that makes you feel good, you know that's right. You know that's correct. You know this person. I have an example of I was interviewed once for a job in the UN, and I was interviewed by the secretary, who was a Asian, very, very, very spiritual person. I don't know how he survived in the UN, which is the most wretched political environment you can ever imagine. It makes politics of almost any country look good by comparison. And I was interviewed by him. And as I got closer to him, to the, to the, to the various levels of, I found the environment getting calmer and calmer. And then until I went into his office, he was there, didn't say anything at first, but I felt this incredible sense of, oh, this is really relaxed. So instead of being, because it was a fairly high position, so instead of being very nervous he managed to make me feel, didn't say hardly anything. So you have, we have occasionally in our life run into people like this. And you know they're right. You know that there is a truth there. So we're inherent, you're right, we're inherently know the truth. But when we mix it with facts and with values of our intellectual and our material dynamics, then things get muddled. But when I went to interview with this guy, like, I should have been wound up, I should have been tense, very relaxed. Not because of me, because I was not at that time a relaxed person. It was with him. So you know there is a truth there. You know there is a value there. There's inherent in you that understanding. And you wish you were like that, you know. But he's evolved in a way that I had not at that point. It's very important, like Louise is saying, to say, okay, this is the time and place where I see something that's really transcendent, something that doesn't lend itself to interpretation. Again, the analogies in math, right? A line is a line. I mean, I'm actually going back to that point. So we are spiritually conscious, soul conscious. We are the point. We are the point in that geometrical construct, right? Understand that until we become conscious of that, there is no point. There is no line. There is no time. There's nothing. First has to be the point, has to be the consciousness, spiritual consciousness. And that point is what creates time. Time does not exist in your awareness. Because up until that time, up until that moment, time is just a measure of things around you. It's not what you have defined as time. So to me, that this particular topic was very, very exciting, because you're saying to myself, using an analogy, is that until you become that point, that geometrical construct that creates a line, that creates plane, that creates a cube, until you have that manifestation of that point, which is construct of mathematics, nothing exists. No time, no space, nothing. So in my circling back, when you have that spiritual consciousness, that soul consciousness, once it's manifest, in my experience, is you gain control of time. Because you're defining, you're creating. Up until that moment, the time that has existed is not yours. It's been other people's time. Your husband's time, your wife's time, your children's time, boss's time, your subordinate's time. That moment, take ownership. You are the point. You are the point. So spiritually conscious point. And in that understanding, you begin to look at time very differently. And like Louise was mentioning before, live that moment. You own that moment. That's the only instance where you can actually say, I am in the present. I am in this moment. Because the consciousness that you have is what gives you the ability and the power to be able to define yourself in that context. And when you're in that consciousness, you live in the moment. You don't live in the past. You don't live in the future. You're acting on a very different kind of plane. That is one of the most important qualities of being spiritually or soul conscious, because you act in a very different plane. And in that plane, you have much more control of time than you do when you're living in the other cycles, other circles of physical, material, emotional, intellectual, because that defines you. But when you get into this point, you're defining your life, you're defining your moment, not your life, you're defining your moment. That's what it circles back to me, is that when you have that consciousness, then you're redefining your existence. And that's been one of the important things for me in my experience, is that the more you focus, on these kind of values, on the spiritual values, the less your energy goes towards the past, and the less it goes towards worrying about the future. And it's something, I still have a regular job. I work at a firm and do all kinds of things. So I have lots of things to worry about if I let myself. But if you focus on this kind of consciousness, how do you define the moment to yourself? And I don't worry about the future. I don't worry about the past, because ultimately it's only what I do now that's going to make a difference. It's only the action I take now, and in dealing with somebody and addressing a problem. This is the moment that's going to make a difference. And this is the moment that counts. And that's kind of a circling back to the beginning of the definition of time. Sorry, I took a long time, didn't I? Anybody have any questions? It's kind of esoteric subject. Everybody has time and nobody has time.
I just want to ask you that when something very traumatic happens in your life a long time ago, you slowly do try, and it's not going to do you any good to just think about that, but you can never forget it, I find.
Well, it's not a question of forgetting the incident, because if it was something traumatic,
Yeah.
it was something dangerous that you got hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't want to be hurt again.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the facts, the dynamic of that situation. You shouldn't forget if it's something that could repeat itself. That's the one thing. But the emotions associated with it,
Yes.
that you have to let go.
Yes.
Because what you do is you had the trauma,
Yes.
and then you remember the trauma, which means you're reliving the trauma. You're reliving the trauma. You're going back and saying, okay, what did happen? What did I? And so you're taking something that hurt you 20 years ago, and you're bringing it to your and you're hurting yourself again. right? You're hurting yourself again. Now, the person who hurt you 20 years ago may not even be alive, may not even, or may not even remember.
No, that person is still in my life,
Oh, okay.
so I can't avoid.
Well, then you remember the dynamics, the incident, the facts,
Yeah,
but you can't continue to remember the pain
the pain.
that caused because you're not remembering the pain. You don't remember the pain. We have a thing about remembrance in the Brahma Kumaris. Remembrance is how we define ourselves spiritually. Okay. And this is an example of remembrance doing the reverse.
Yeah.
The remembrance of this defines you materially, emotionally. You're remembering the pain. That's not something that really is constructive because if you're remembering the pain, you cannot understand what was going on that created the situation. The only thing that's important is the pain. So your understanding of it is clouded.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of forgetting something that happened that was dangerous or that was painful. It's a question of not reliving it, not bringing the emotional content to it. The facts are the facts.
Yes.
Okay. But you can't bring back the emotional content because then you're hurting yourself again. If it hurt you before, then your version of that is happening again. And that's one of the critical things that we try. The remembrance is very powerful, as you probably, right? We think then you have to put that energy of remembrance into other pursuits, things that have to do with your spiritual consciousness.
Yeah, that's
Remembering those qualities. Put your energy into that, not to remembering something painful.
Yeah.
Not forgetting. We're not talking about forgetting,
Not forget.
but remembering the painful emotions is just
I have even forgiven, but I cannot forget. That's my problem.
forgetting. Forgetting is different.
Yeah.
Okay, forgetting is you can't. We learn something happens. We do something. It was wrong. It was problematic. It was hurt, and you learn from that. You don't do it again, or you avoid it, and so it's part of the way we live. We still live in a material world. We're not ghosts. You know, we're not
Yeah.
subtle beings. So we live in the world, but we can't remember the pain. Because if we do that, then our energy is not invested in trying to resolve the problems. It's investing on reliving the problems. And that energy is incredibly consuming. People really hurt themselves very badly doing that.
Thank you.
I want to add to that, what I learned here is the power to put a full stop on that. Can we call it a resentment? You have a thing you just, you forgive, but you can't forget. But you carry it. You're carrying it like a heavy, yeah. Yeah. So you're carrying. So the minute that comes up and it's not forgiveness, right? It's the other side of forgiveness. The minute it comes up, we're taught to put a full stop on it. Like let it come in and let it go and stay with the forgiveness. That's the power we have to choose, to really choose, right?
But we can't do that in the consciousness or in the awareness, in the intellectual and physical awareness. We can only do it in spiritual consciousness. You can't forgive in a material consciousness. It's not possible. It's impossible to do that. Forgiveness, by its definition, is a spiritual, right? Altruism is a spiritual definition. Okay.
These are the truths.
So there is a famous saying that I love from Swami Vivekananda from India, who was one of the actual fathers of modern Hindu spiritualism. Actually, Hinduism has a modern version to it. It's not all ancient. And he says, the atheist who treats his fellow man altruistically and helps him without expecting any kind of compensation or return is closer to God than the devout person who doesn't. That to me was one of the most favorite statements because he was a very influential figure in Hindu spirituality. So he's saying that God is not letting any good people go. Well, he's not so happy about some people who think they're good. Okay. But I thought that was so that speaks to your point, right? Right? That that is what you need to be in that consciousness. You cannot be in the consciousness of the actual act, the consciousness of your reaction to it. It has to be removed from that. And that's spiritual. That's always spiritual consciousness.
Thank you. Yeah, we're gonna move on. No, that's it. Beautiful. That's why you're here every week, right? Okay. Brother Tony, before we ask you to conclude with a meditative little session, I have a little bit, I need a few minutes to talk about what's happening here next week. And it's a little bit special. First, I want to thank you so much. This has been stimulating, exciting, right? And I hope those of you who are new will linger a minute. And if you give me your email address, I'll be able to, we send you just weekly announcements of what's going on here. Next week, we have Healthy Minds, Healthy People, Healthy Planet. And it's featuring, do you know about this?
Yes, I know him.
Okay, so you can help me pronounce the second man's name. It's Jim Paymar and Golo
I need to see it.
Wahim Pills. And they're going to be talking about, and it's an inspiring conversation on interchange and global impact. But I want to tell you who they are. Here are their credentials, okay? And they want you to discover how positive thinking can create positive change and learning how to do that. So the first gentleman, Jim, is actually a newscaster, Emmy-winning broadcaster, media coach, and former CNBC anchor with 25 years of experience in television, radio, and digital media. And he has interviewed top CEOs. He's got nice credentials. And the other gentleman is a meditation teacher, sustainability advocate, and I speak, and environment innovator. He has traveled to over 75 countries, lecturing on spiritual and environmental topics. And he's played a key role in the India One Solar Project and is a prominent speaker at UN climate conferences. So this will be our conversation next week. They would like you to register. I don't have a flyer hanging here. I'll have it Sunday, but if you'd like to know, just call Harmony House. And I hope you can join us in person. Will it also be on Zoom?
I assume so. Golo actually has done a lot of sustainability work in Madhuban. He's the
Oh.
one that had all of the different types of alternative energy uses.
Tell them what Madhuban is.
Madhuban is the center spiritual center of the organization. It's in Mount Abu in India, and Golo is the one. He created a whole bunch of different things, solar arrays of all different kinds. He's really a very brilliant guy. I've heard him speak on a couple of. He's been here before, so he's very worth listening to.
And I think we'll have many people here.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Next
Yeah, next
Thursday
Thursday.
night, yeah. And then the week after, I'll be doing a panel. I'll be moderating a panel. So do come. And it's almost 8 o'clock. Maybe a quick little goodbye and thank
Okay.
you again.
We go deep into consciousness. Down to the core, center, past, the sphere, our life, accounts for accomplishments, loves, desires, awareness, keep traveling down to the sphere, this beautiful earth we inhabit, and of which we are an extension. In all its physical brilliance and beauty. Then keep traveling down the center of the universe, place we have become whole, transcended, all those things that define us, that define the world around us. Down to the center, we know who we are, mind. We begin again. Here, nature. Our existence. We hold on to it.
Thank you for the time. Perfect ending for this beautiful evening. Thank you. Hope we got you all thinking. And guess what it's time for? Totally, which is a sweet we offer when you leave. You always leave with a sweet tasting email and a blessing card. And for anyone new, come give me your email if you choose, and we'll send you. We don't do anything except send announcements. Thank you, Brother Eric, in the control room. And thank you, Brother Tony, again. And we'll see you next week for a special program for you. Om Shanti. Oh.